Behind the scenes is crazy. Oh, here we go. And we are live. Yes. So we just started going live and gonna wait to see when people jump on. Alrighty. Gonna wait to see when we get our notifications that we have gone live. That usually takes a little bit of time. And we are live on YouTube. Yes, I love it. I love it. Come on in, people. Come on in for the next edition of Tuesday Talk. I hope you guys are having as much fun with Tuesday Talk as I am. The Shrine of My Aunt is the platform, and a boots a shot. I am your host for Tuesday Talk, and we bring to you people who are Pan-African minded, who are here to push forward the tools that we need for Black liberation from a Pan-African perspective, to learn the language, to learn the history, to learn the rituals, to learn the culture, to break down these pseudo superficial differences that for real, we do not have. Okay. So today I am delighted to bring to you an up and coming Dr. Jeffries, an up and coming Dr. Clark, an up and coming Jabari Osaze, an up and coming Theophile Obenga. I done dropped some big names on my brother's shoulders for him tonight, but I met him when I was actually on another panel with Omawale Africa, who was on here last week, and I was very impressed with his responses and some of the things that he said. And so I asked him to be on the show, and he's here tonight. And I'm really excited to bring him here because this is a part of a newer, younger generation of people who are educating themselves so that he can bring the knowledge to the people, so we can continue this until we have reached our goal. So I'm going to introduce to you brother Ìmò Òdó, formerly Zach Brooks. He was born and raised in Piscataway, New Jersey. He began his journey of rediscovery of our true history with the introduction of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm X's notable quote that has come to define his path is, "Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research." I'm going to say that again. Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. After this initial exposure, he decided to focus on the discipline of history for his undergraduate studies and sought to learn the many narratives and processes which have shaped the present conditions of Black people in the United States and throughout the world. Upon graduating from Temple University, he earned a BA in history and chose to work as a teacher in middle schools and high schools to share knowledge of the African past that he learned and collected. Working within these schools allowed him to realize the structural barriers in place that prevented him and many others from sufficiently providing our people, children and adults, with an education that would affirm us as African people and permit us to liberate ourselves from systemic conditions imposed upon us. He chose to return to graduate school in pursuit of a skill set and credentials that would enable him to maximize his capacity to educationally empower African people. He also spent 3 years working as an assistant to the archivist of the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American Collection, which is a library and museum of African world history. So far, he has earned an MA in Africology and is continuing his graduate level studies within Africology by pursuing the PhD at Temple University. It's my pleasure to welcome Ìmò Òdó. Brother Ìmò, what's good? How you doing?
Hey, how you doing? I'm well.
Good.
Happy to be here.
Good. I'm happy to have you here. So, my first question that I want to ask you is, your birth name was Zach Brooks, and you changed it to Ìmò Òdó. Can you tell us what brought you to the space where you felt like your name had to be something different. The way people called you and what you responded to was different. What influenced you to have that name? Where'd you get it? What does it mean? Let's learn about who Ìmò Òdó is.
Yeah. So yeah, my birth name given to me was Zachary Brooks. Um, well, it was given to me by my mother. So, I didn't. I guess I never thought too much into it. Growing up. Uh, this ain't Omawale. Yeah, that's my man. Omawale, that's my man. But yeah, I never really thought too much into the naming nomenclature thing. But when was, I was exposed to the conversation around naming and changing your name and slave names and that kind of thing as I read Asada Shakur and Malcolm X and many others, but I guess you never make the click for yourself as it relates to your own name
Mm-hmm.
until, and, I studying all this history, African history. I mean, before as a history major, you don't study African history. They kind of have you study the black speckles and everybody else's history.
Right.
So, um, yeah, so until I got into grad school and started studying Afrocentricity, some of the other, I guess we could say, prolific intellectual giants that helped build the field of Black studies, who led that insurgent movement into the universities. I I never made the connection between myself and the naming conversation until
Mm-hmm.
one of my teachers, she actually has a lecture on YouTube called "Naming the First Act of African Agency,"
Mm.
and her name is uh, that's the the Perat of Afrocentricity International, Amma Mazama. She's one of my teachers as well. She's the one who actually led the Dina ceremony that we have with Afrocentricity International. It's a naming ceremony where we encourage other Black people, other African people, to reclaim an African name for themselves and put themselves back in orbit with their African ancestors. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, when I ultimately came to understand how naming is a powerful tool
Mm-hmm.
of defining reality and defining um, things. I thought of power as, when people accept a definition of reality. So
Mm.
if I can define reality and someone else will accept it, then that's a form of power. So we've accepted all of these European names and European terms for everything without recognizing the power is only held with the definer, not the people who are defined. So I didn't see my name as an expression of pride, of race pride, or cultural pride. I just kind of saw my name as like a happenstance. But when I began to study Afrocentricity, the emphasis is placed on us taking control of our own lives, defining reality for ourselves, and ultimately redefining reality on African terms. How did
Mm.
our ancestors, understand the world and define themselves and define the things that they did and all of these things? We want to restore that continuity between ourselves and our ancestors. So that's why I took the name. So when I decided to take the name, the process effectively was I chose meanings. I didn't actually choose the name. The name was chosen for me.
Mm.
So the name that I basically chose because I following in the line behind Dr. John Howard Clark, I was inspired by Malcolm X, and I figured out who his teacher was, and I was like, oh, I kind of like the teacher a lot, Dr. John Howard Clark. So um, when I started to follow in that path, he said he only wanted to be a classroom teacher. That was Dr. Clark's goal, and I resonated with that because for somebody to be so profound and so prolific and to have such a like an ordinary goal, I thought was a yeah, it was moving, so um I set out to be the same path, just to teach. So the name I chose was one who passes knowledge to the youth, or one who
Mm.
passes knowledge of our past to the youth. And Dr. Mazama chose the name Ìmò Òdó for me. Imo means youth, and Odo means Imo means knowledge, and Odo means youth, and they're both terms are in both names are in the Yoruba language. So, the way I see it as a Pan Africanist is, I relate more to a Yoruba name than I do to a Hebraic name or a British name. Like, because Zach Brooks is a British name, it's an English name. I'm not an Englishman, so I didn't feel any connection to the English name. I'm not a Hebrew. Ever since I was little, I was, religion constrains the ability to ask questions. So ever since I was little, I was never really mystified or disillusioned with Christianity. So I didn't really have any attachment to the religious connotation of my first name either. So, I used to actually jokingly say to some of my friends, like, yeah, my name's Zach, but I ain't no Jew. Like, it used to be a joke. Like, so, but yeah, so I took the name because I think it's an essential part of kind of understanding who you are, understanding who you're supposed to be, what you got to live up to, and your overall destiny, and your orientation. And everybody has a destiny. Just some people don't live up to it, and some people actively live up to their destiny. So for me, I wanted to actively, set my path forward. It's a quest. So
you said a whole lot, which was so dope and so awesome. So, my name, I'm about to give y'all my full government. Don't be trying to open up no credit cards, y'all. Okay. Saeed Malik Anyabuchi Singletary. Because my parents wanted to give me an African name. So I feel you when it's like you have this British name and that doesn't resonate with you. My name is mainly African. Singletary isn't, clearly, because that's, the slave owner's name. Anyabuchi is really the only West African name, which means God's will. I'm going to skip to Saeed. Saeed means happy and fortunate. It's Arabic, but because my parents liked how it sounded and what it meant, they kept it. It's Arabic and male, but they just said, oh, ain't nobody gonna know. This was a long time ago when people just really didn't know all that type of stuff. So that's what they were saying. People know that now, but they didn't think that then. Malik is after Malcolm X. Malcolm X is definitely present, had a profound presence in my life as a child through my father in one way and through my mother in another way. So I definitely resonate with the life of Malcolm X being the person that kind of ignited a fire, or the fire within that never goes out. So that definitely resonated with me when I read your bio, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X.
I mean, like, I think the thing about Malcolm X what stood out to me, I think everybody has parts of his story that may have made a stamp on their lives.
That's right.
I think the one that really made a stamp on me as somebody very young, as an atheist, when I realized he was able to submit himself to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad on faith. Within that act, he recognized that there was a humility that went along with resigning yourself to divinity. Now, I didn't take that course in terms of Islam. When I read it, what I understood was what made Malcolm X so prolific was his ability to transform. His when he transformed himself from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yes.
I mean, that kind of that kind of transformation there's very few people who transform themselves and therein other people in that kind of way, that kind of magnitude. To me, that is what a revolution is. That's
right.
It's a dramatic change in in a large group of people, a dramatic social change. So I think Malcolm X absolutely was a revolutionary for inspiring that kind of transformation, not only in himself but other people. I mean, and you see it in other
Absolutely.
people who change their names too. Asada
Yep.
Shakur, she's the second one. Me being from Jersey, you know, when the Gestapo tried to get her on 287, that's right around the corner from where I grew up. So that hit home. I was like, dang, it's not over. Like,
It's right there.
hmm?
It had to have happened before you were born. That happened before you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
I read the book.
Absolutely. Said that fast, y'all. Go ahead.
I read the book, but I put it together where it happened.
Oh,
That's
right,
that's what
right.
yeah. I was reading it. And I was like, oh, it's right over here. Like,
Like, it's right there.
yeah,
Yeah,
same thing with the Who Shot Malcolm X documentary.
yeah,
You read Malcolm X, you read all these books about him, and you kind of find out that the guy who killed him is like around.
right.
Yeah.
I can't even go there. I saw this documentary, man. Anyway, the way that the pictures and conversations of about Malcolm X in my father's house made Malcolm X feel like a relative in our home. And like I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm not saying that like I'm saying some profound statement and nobody else feels this. I'm sure there are other people who feel like Malcolm X was a relative that was assassinated, like a relative in your blood family. That's how he felt to me from conversations with my father and stuff like that. My father, he's an ancestor, but growing up, he let us know that he had heard Malcolm X speak when he was, an up and coming, a part of his, metamorphosis. And he heard him speak. And because my father was either in the nation or affiliated with the Nation of Islam at some level, I was never really clear about that. But anyway, so to hear him talk about Malcolm and to see the pictures of Malcolm in the house, like framed pictures on the wall. We didn't have Martin Luther King. We definitely didn't have JFK. And we faux show did not have no white Jesus up on the wall. Anyway, I digress. I want to bring us back to what we were talking about, because I think we could talk about Malcolm X all night long. So so just one last thing that I think is important for Black liberation is when you said Malcolm X's ability to continue to not, what did you say, transpose or
Transform.
to transform. That's what you're
Yeah.
right. To transform, and that act is revolutionary. And the reason that we have to transform is because we need to take our language back. We need to get our names back. We need to get our food back, our everything. And so there will be transformations, and we need to be open to that and understand that that is a part of putting us on the right path for Black liberation. Living your life from an African perspective is really our first step, because that puts you open, that opens you to receive all of the information that we're going to need in order to achieve our Black liberation. History, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is like the main thing that we need. We need to know our own history. In our history, we learn our culture and things we did. And so from that, we're able to open up and receive the instructions, if you will, for transformation. So I'm glad that you brought all of that out with Malcolm X and with changing your name and the person who gave that to you. Somebody asked who missed it, what does Ìmò Òdó mean? Ìmò means knowledge, Òdó means youth,
Yeah,
right?
so together, yeah, so the name Emo means knowledge, and the name Odo means youth. So it means one who knows the youth, or one who passes knowledge to the youth. There's other interpretations of the name. I see the question that says, do you study the Yoruba language or practice Ifa? I do not practice Ifa. I'm currently learning more and more about many different um, of our ancestral traditions. I'm on my, like I said, I'm on my quest, so I'm learning myself. And I don't study the language. I do study the Medu Neter. I'm trying to learn that. Language barriers. We don't grow up explicitly speaking African languages. I mean, we speak Ebonics without recognizing what it is. But so I'm learning the language barrier myself. But there was another question I think I was supposed to ask. I was trying to get at.
About your name?
Yeah. So the name based on the inflections of the points of each letter in the name,
Mhm.
it can mean different things as well. So I was told, I was yeah, one of my friends was telling me about, one of my friends who is Yoruba was telling me about the name. So I still have learning to do for myself. Um, and the other thing about the name that I actually found kind of interesting is that when my grandfather passed, my grandfather, he was like, he did a lot of different things. He was a jet mechanic. So
Ooh.
he was in the Air Force. He used to work on airplanes. He could take apart a car. He was a carpenter. He did all kind of different stuff. And at his funeral, when I eulogized him, there's a woman who knew my grandfather. She, was a teacher in the town my grandfather lived in, and she came to the funeral. She came up to me and she said, your grandfather was like Imhotep.
Wow. What a
So
compliment.
yeah, I mean it was. I mean it was funny because I think I was gonna put that in what I was gonna say about him, and my grandmother was like, that's too much.
That's too much. Which
So,
which part of the country was it? Down south?
no, it's here in New Jersey.
In Jersey? Oh,
He's
okay.
from. My grandfather's from Florida, but
Oh, okay.
he lived 60 years of his life in New Jersey. So
Yeah, yeah. Right,
yeah,
right. Yeah. Cool, cool. I think changing one's name is very powerful. I've never thought about changing my name because it's already African. So, but the act of actually changing your name is something that is very powerful because you get to do it yourself. And what I had another thing that you mentioned was having your name and coming into your name. Hold on for 1 second. Where's my? Sorry, my dog acts up sometimes. Taking the agency and like the control yourself to give yourself your name is something that's also very powerful. Growing into your name is something that is also very important as well. The name that I have, my Kemetic name that the high priestess and priest gave me, is a name that I'm growing into. And it's a big name, and I think of it. It reminds me of what I have to do every day. So Abut Sashat. So Abut means priestess, and Sashat is the divine feminine energy of knowledge. She helps create things in terms of architecture. She keeps records of history. She does a lot of that kind of work, and that is something that I do naturally. And when they gave me my name, it was that, and there's another part of my name that I grow into as well. So for all of you who are on Tuesday Talk right now, if you've been following me, we are making sure that you walk away with tangible lessons, something tangible that you can use to help with Black liberation. So I hope y'all taking notes, right? If your name is like Mike Smith, ain't nothing wrong with that name. However, that's not an African name. Does that name fit you? The process of giving yourself your name might be the first step to putting yourself onto shifting your paradigm so that you're coming from an African perspective. Okay, so that's
well,
one of the first takeaways is naming yourself. Go ahead.
yeah. I think what it is for me. I didn't recognize that you know what you don't, if you don't know the meaning of your name, right? Then sometimes I guess the question is, does the name serve the function that names normally serve for
Hmm.
people? So if, what is the function that names serve for you if not to define who or what something is? So I didn't know what Zachary really meant. I mean, I didn't know how it related to me. So I
Hmm.
don't think the name served me.
Mm.
So I thought that way even though I had the name for a very long time. I think what it is sometimes you recognize that we exist in contradictions, and sometimes
Hmm.
you come to accept some of the contradictions. And I'm learning more and more that you can't tell other people how how to liberate themselves, right? You can't make people do things. So what
Right.
you do is you have to be the example for what you understand, right? So if I understand that I read Chancellor Williams, and Chancellor Williams is talking about how uh, they used, Arabs and Europeans used names to basically turn the achievements of Africans into Caucasian achievements in history by naming, if you had a name like Muhammad or Eli or something, then in 200 years, the people who the name belongs to will claim you and your achievements for
Period.
themselves. You see,
Period.
so
Yes.
when I thought of it in that way,
Mm.
when I thought, you know, when we, when we practice Ma'at, we trying to build our community so that we become known to our community and we can live for eternity. And when your descendants call your name, that's how you will become an ancestor.
Mm.
So if you have a Eurasian name, your descendants will still call upon you. But you know what? What happens in 50 years when you see white kids playing Martin Luther King in their school play? They're taking their name back. They're taking
It's like the
so
wrong label.
I mean, I'm using Martin Luther King explicitly because of Martin Luther in 95, or what is it, 97 Theses. I mean, that's where Martin Luther King Jr., his name comes from.
That's
So
right.
so I'm looking, and it was in the newspaper. It was some school, it's like a school play, and they had a white kid playing Martin Luther King in the school play, and people were upset about it. And I guess I didn't really see a relationship between the names and the Martin Luther King thing until I reread Chancellor Williams recently, and I was like, "Oh, dang, that was expedited." That happened very quickly. Like,
Right. 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 That happened like yesterday. Yes. Yes. So I want to go on to kind of what your dissertation is, which is the effective way of learning African history. And I didn't even know you could get a PhD in the effective way of learning it. I figured you read it, you study it, you memorize it, you learn it, you talk about it. Can you tell us? Can you tell us what is the effective way of learning African history?
well, I think the most effective way to understand African history is to first come in contact with it. I think we have a lot of people who say a lot of things about Africa and African people without having done any really genuine research. We have people who saw something on Google or in a book, or or heard something, and they fit it right into their analysis without having tried to actually get their hand on some documents. It's good to read a book, but you have to read more than one book. So
Yeah.
for me as a historian, trained in the history department, kind of feeling isolated all by myself, my strategy was to I'm gonna get you from a couple different angles. So if we're talking about Christopher Columbus, then for me, I think it was constructive. I mean, not everybody has the time or energy to do this, but I think it's a constructive exercise to be exhaustive when you're trying to learn what happened. Because when
Yeah.
you hear what happens in a given historical event or about a given personality, you're going to have different perspectives on what happened. You're going to have different um, viewpoints. You're going to have different stories on what happens. So this kind of gets in the way of people talking about an objective rendering of African history. The question becomes, from which perspective do we study African history?
That's right.
Because sometimes the because white supremacy as a system can be so it can seem totalizing because of the number of institutions that remain under the control of Europeans, whether that's directly or indirectly. Europeans have colonized information about the world, and it's up to us to be able to discern between the truth and what's been fabricated. So, so we need to be, serious when it comes to excavating and figuring out what happened in the past as a relate and focus on one thing at a time. I remember I used to wake up in the morning and I used to just read a Wikipedia on a different African country each morning, like something simple like that. And then that might evolve from you reading the Wikipedia of each African country or each country that you have interest in to a closer examination of something that happened in that history that you may take interest in. For me, I was my thrust into African history was ignited by the idea that there has to be a way to solve racism, white supremacy. When I read Malcolm X's autobiography, I wanted to test for myself if what he was saying was true. If white people actually were devils, right? So I went and studied the history of the world and saw that they kind of disagree with about just about everybody they get in contact with. And
disagree is a very benign word.
Benign word, exactly. So they commit genocide against everybody they go to war with. Let's put it
That's
that
a
way.
fact. Straight like that.
That's how that goes. And so for me, I was like, well, what does African resistance that's successful look like? In the history department, you're not going to find that, because what they're normally teaching you is their victories over us, or they're teaching us their history from their perspective, as though it's all history or neutral history.
Right.
So what happens is, even when you're learning about African history, what you're learning about African history oftentimes is what Europeans have done in Africa and to African people.
Yeah.
But what we never learn, or what we seldom learn until we get into what our ancestors done and what our people have done, and the agency of our people. What happens is we don't understand what our successes actually look like. But then once we understand what our people have done, we start to see, oh, this was a victory. Oh, Lumumba, this was a victory here. Oh, Sankara, this was a victory. Oh, what happened to Haiti? That's a victory. Okay. Oh, in the ancient world, Amonarines whooping the Romans' ass. Okay, that's our victory too. But sometimes we only know what they have done to us, and we think that constitutes Black history, or we think that means African history. So it's important to understand what has happened to us, but because we are the oldest people on the planet,
Speak
and
on it.
we have the longest history, the oldest history of any people on the planet, it's a problem that we know the least about our own history. So we need to return to the true chronology of not only our history but world history. And I address some other things about some things that need to be addressed before I think that can be done effectively. So I'll leave it there before I start writing my dissertation on camera.
So a sidebar that's really actually relevant. How long is your MA, your Master's in Art and Africology? And since you have an MA and you're currently in the PhD program in Africology, how much more time do you have to spend to get your PhD in Africology?
Okay, so I got my BA 2015 in history at Temple. I transferred to Temple, and then when I finished, I went home and worked at Malcolm X Shabazz High School for about 6 months or so. And then when I went to grad school, 2016, that's when I started the master's back at Temple, because I was like, I'm not going back to the history department. I'm going to Africology. So I went over there to Africology to study with Dr. Asante, Dr. Mazama, and my other teacher, Dr. Nehusi, at the time. And then that I got my master's 2018.
So 2 years.
two years for the master's, and
Mhm.
then I continued directly after. So I've been nonstop. I've been going, finish up classes, did computations, and now I'm writing my dissertation, putting the touches on a proposal before I can become ABD, which basically means all but dissertation. So I'm not there yet. I should be soon. I keep dragging my feet. I you know, you tinker with one thing, you start tinkering with a million, and next thing you know, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So so
I'll be done. I'll be done with my dissertation. My goal is to be done next year. So yeah. So hopefully May, but that might be that might be pushing it. But I think if I grind it out, I'll be done before the next school year roll around because my funding running out. So I can't be in school
forever.
anymore. No, no more loans. No more. No, not doing that.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Yeah. So I think it's important to recognize the fact that he is being taught. But now, for those of you who don't know, Temple has like the dopest master's and PhD program in Africology in the country. Period. I've looked at some. I've looked at a lot, and some schools are dope for this. Some schools are dope for that. Temple, the Africology department is like the best there. So the fact that he's getting educated there, he's getting the best that you can get, and it's good to come from, I would say, a like an organized, structured, standardized perspective of learning history, because sometimes it could feel overwhelming because there's so much stuff to read by so many different people. Where do you start? How do you integrate it? How do you make it make sense in a comprehensive perspective? So I
Yeah.
think, it's really, I think it's important to recognize that this might be an option for other people to be a part of educating. Because listen, guys, we have to learn about ourselves first in
Yeah.
order to do anything else. Learning about ourselves, one major thing that it does is it breaks down these superficial, ridiculous, pseudo differences that Pan Africans have. It's just ridiculous. Learning about ourselves, we understand that we are African people dispersed throughout the world in the diaspora. And we have to really kind of look at it like that, as opposed to all of these other different names that unfortunately are used to be divisive. Okay. I mean, yeah, you can be proud of what your direct ancestors did in a different location in the world besides the continent, but past pride should not be divisive. So I just want to say that.
Well, and to the point you were making about differences, because I just had this conversation with my cousin. He's going to school like NYU, um, and I was telling him the problem is when we come from the perspective when we study our history, when we study African history from the perspective of non-African people, right?
Mm.
From maybe Europeans, or maybe some of us have other influences. Maybe somebody's a Buddhist, or well, the next, or whatever they are. If they're coming, if their line of thinking is from another culture, then when they look at African history and culture, they're gonna piece it apart like an outsider would. You see that they're gonna look at pieces to understand the whole, instead of coming from within to understand how African people are already similar to each other. So
Thank you.
from
Yes.
so from an African perspective, I mean, or from an Afrocentric perspective, or maybe even a Pan-Africanist perspective,
Mhm.
the distinctions between different groups of African people are significantly, or maybe I should say, they're more insignificant than the ways that we are the same.
Period.
So the thing is, the people who like to place emphasis on the difference between us tend to find more similarity of themselves with other people.
Speak
I,
on
I,
it. Can you say that again? Can you
yeah.
say it louder for the Negroes in the back?
Well, I mean but this is the kind of alienation that we're dealing with, that
Yeah.
colonialism produces for our people. even for those of us who are actively working towards the objective of Pan-Africanism, or actively working towards the liberation of African people. These are still pitfalls.
Yeah.
These are still conceptual limitations. These are baggages that sometimes our people don't recognize, even if that's not our intention, even if that's not, sometimes we don't recognize the contradictions that we exist within. And I think that's what Afrocentricity is very effective at doing. It's helping you to resolve those contradictions,
Mm.
because
Mm.
it has a methodological framework. It has rules that govern it. You see, so I mean, one of the things that I find is, I find some prolific scholars who are part of the African centered movement. And this is, but I find that they don't have a framework that is consistent and that works, almost as though it's a science. And that's what the Afrocentric paradigm is for. Now you have other people who have also had um, frameworks, like methodologies and frameworks. I think what sets Dr. Molefi Asante apart from mostly everyone else was his ability to defend his methodology.
Mhm.
So I think no matter how prolific, or no matter how much history a lot of people know, I mean, it's like not everybody's gonna be LeBron James. Like, everybody's not gonna be a brilliant, creative way thinker who can figure out their way out of the system on their own, and figure
Right.
out. Not everybody has that ability. Some people do, and it's an uncanny ability and talent that many Pan-Africanists have, and that's why some of us feel so isolated. But we have to build the bridge for those who can't find their way to relocate themselves, or to put themselves back
That's right.
into the perspective of our ancestors. So that's what a
Mhm.
methodology is for. So for me, I think, whether you go to school or not, you can pick up a book. You can try to read Dr. Asante's text. You can read the other Afrocentric thinkers, and you know what? Not all Afrocentric thinkers abide by the rules. You have some Afrocentric thinkers that I wouldn't say are so Afrocentric, even though they're calling themselves such.
Mhm.
Same thing with African centered. So for me, I think the end goal is for us to have rules that we can implement that yield the results that we're looking for. So you have many people who say this in different ways. I've heard uh, Mama Marimba Ani. She says we need an African social science, but that's exactly what Afrocentricity is. I think people get too caught up in polemics and what they don't like about people personally, and then they become anti-intellectual, and they stop reading, and they stop critiquing, and they stop engaging, and then they just result to stereotypes. I mean, this happens within the quote unquote conscious community, within Black studies, and it happens when we deal with people outside of our group as well. So I mean, we just need to be aware of, how do we give ourselves the most robust representation of ourselves.
How
That's
do we give ourselves the most robust representation of ourselves? Lee or Cheryl, can y'all put that in the chat? How do we give ourselves the most robust representation of ourselves, or anybody? How do we give ourselves the most robust representation of ourselves? Okay, that's poignant. How do we give it to ourselves? Ain't nobody gonna give it to us but us. So how do we do that? He's telling us we need a methodology that comes from our Afrocentric perspective that basically is replicatable. I'm throwing in the replicatable part so that
yeah.
it's something we can teach to other people so that we can have that as a part of what it is that we do.
and
How
that's
do we give ourselves the most
and that's why we changed. That's why Dr. Sante and Dr. Mazama and so many others fought to change the name of our department from African American Studies to Africology, because African American Studies, the name is very narrow in scope.
Right, right.
Right. So what we're looking for is a way to find the continuity of our people
That's
with
right.
our source, with Africa. So Africa needs to be the source of the knowledge that we have about ourselves. And what we know about ourselves cannot be divorced from our ultimate source. So if we, the more we try to run from Africa, the further into slavery and other contradictions we get into. I mean,
Yes. And I would imagine that that's a long little marathon sprint, running from yourself. How do you even run from yourself? That's crazy to me when you see people running from themselves. It's like you can't do it, because wherever you are, there you are. So let me ask you this question. So you've done so from 2016 to 2021, so that's 5 years of study. Can you give us 3 like poignant aha moments built on a fact, a book, a lesson, something that you can share with us, so that we can use that as a tool to not only shift towards and get to our Pan-African frame of mind, but to understand Afrocentricity, because you were saying that there's a method to that. There's a method to the Afrocentricity. So give us something that you learned that it coincides with grasping Afrocentricity for ourselves.
Okay, so the example I like to use is a book that is one of my favorite books that I read as a history major, and yeah, and this goes to what we were saying about not dealing with people personally and dealing with them as intellectuals, because I actually love this author. I love his book is CLR James. CLR James is a Pan-Africanist.
Can you spell it? I'm gonna put it in the chat.
CLR James.
CLR. Okay.
Yeah, CLR James. He wrote the seminal text, or the first real comprehensive text on the Haitian Revolution. And the name of the book is called The Black Jacobins. So just I guess if I could give a 1-2 lesson on Afrocentricity, the whole point of Afrocentricity is to study ourselves from our own perspective, our own, from the way that African people think, from the way African people would understand, from the way that we would come to relate to ourselves. So I loved the book when I first read it as a history major. It's the first book I've ever read about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. One thing that I came to know later, I don't want to get into everything in the book because it's a great book. I encourage everybody to read it. One thing I came to recognize later was the title. The title of the book is The Black Jacobins. So what I began to realize is the Jacobins were the Frenchmen. They were the left wing. They were from the West Bank of France. They were the left wing of the French Revolution. Europeans, Frenchmen. And when Jean-Jacques Dessalines defeated the French, he defeated Napoleon Bonaparte, right? When he defeated Napoleon Bonaparte and his armies, I've heard people in the history department refer to Jean-Jacques Dessalines as the Black Napoleon.
I'm sorry, what?
The Black Napoleon.
The Black loser?
Well, all right, you follow. So basically, the contradiction that exists within calling Dessalines the Black Napoleon, you hit it on the head. How is the European terrorist or genocidiary who got defeated by the Haitians? How are the champions, the African champions, now the black versions of the European losers? Right? How does that make sense? Right? It only makes sense because CLR James, clearly that's not his intention to disparage uh Haitians, right? He's not trying to say you are black versions of French people, right? I don't know if CLR James he clearly understands the African slave trade is what produced the black population on that island. He clearly understands that. But because of his ideological orientation or his because he's a socialist, because he's a Marxist, his ideas are couched within the development of European history and culture. Karl
Mhm.
Marx and Hegel and many of these other philosophers, they didn't just. It's not just their words that people imitate. It's the logics. It's the epistemology. It's the way of thinking.
Yep.
So because CLR James is a leftist, a socialist, and he's concerned with atheism, what is the animating force behind what initiated the Haitian Revolution? African spirituality.
Yep.
It's barely mentioned in the book.
Mm.
Voodoo is barely mentioned in the book, and I mean, we can comb through that with nicer language, but the point I'm making is CLR James is dislocated. CLR James has a great intention in terms of writing a comprehensive historical text about one of the most important events in African history, right? That, like, we give him his props for that. But what Afrocentricity is supposed to enable us to do is to extract what's of benefit and leave what's of limit, or
Mm.
what's limiting methodologically. So if we're going to say that CLR James wrote a great text, what about the text is great? What about the text is very limited? So Afrocentricity helps us get into that. So I mean, I don't, so the title is one limitation, and the connotation of us being black versions of Europeans
It's
is
crazy.
is something that is actually projected by something CLR James said about himself. He called himself a Negropean because he studied European literature.
He
He
called
knew
himself a what?
CLR James read so much literature, European
Uh-huh.
literature, British literature, French literature, Russian literature. He's a literary, he's brilliant. He's a bibliophile. He's brilliant. But he believed that because he read so much European literature and philosophy, that his mind was indeed European. He believed that of himself. So he called
Wow.
himself a Negropean. So so
He used
so
that word, Negropean.
yeah. But I'm being nice. I need to be nicer to CLR James because
Mm.
because even if I disagree with his ideology, I
Mm-hmm.
respect him as a prolific African historian. So I think what it is we have, this is the kind of issue we're dealing with when it comes to Afrocentricity. So much of the text written about African people and written about our people um, are great. They have such great information in them. We love them. We need these books. We still need these books. But
Right. Right.
in order for us to produce new information or more clarifying information for our people, we need to understand what kinds of limitations
Right.
the influence of Europeans has created for us. The kinds of contradictions that have been created by us being acculturated or miseducated into European ways of thinking, or European culture, or European theories, European ideologies. The thing is, we don't understand that through their religions, through their philosophies, through their theories,
Thank
we
you.
we inherit their perspectives, we inherit their values. That's how that works. So people kind of want to save European ideas, by Africanizing them or blackening them, when really what happens is we become footnotes in their story again when we try to fit ourselves into their paradigms or into their worldview.
Are y'all
So,
here listening to this brother speak? Do y'all hear what he is saying? We absorb their various institutions, and I just don't mean schools. I do mean schools, but I mean their religion, their philosophy, their language, their idioms, you know, their standards of beauty, the things they say and do. We absorb it so much that, just like what CLR James was saying, it affects your brain and the way that you
well, he accepted it. You
the
see,
way
like,
that you move. And I was want to get to that. I think that I think so. So the second point, just kind of in summary, is there are going to be some limitations, okay? But we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater,
no.
especially when there is a recognition that there's some Eurocentricity going on up in here, you know. So one of the things the first thing you said was their religion, which is my sticking point, because even as a kid, I felt deceived. Not that someone told me a mistruth, because if I get something that's a mistruth and I tell it to you thinking it's a mistruth, I'm telling you misinformation, but I'm not deceiving you because I'm not trying to give you the wrong information. For me as a kid, the deceit felt evil. It felt like when Robert De Niro played the character of Louis Cypher in that movie with Lisa Bonet years ago. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about. I forgot the name of the movie, but there was a if y'all know the name of the movie with Lisa Bonet in it and Robert De Niro, like from forever ago, put it in the chat because I forgot. But the point is, he played the role of the devil, Lucifer, but his first name was Louis, his last name was Cypher, Louis Cypher. And the feeling of deception and evil just emanated from that character. And when my pastors lied to me, and I went to a white fundamentalist Baptist church, and then when I went to Spelman in Atlanta, I used to go to some of the little Black churches out there, and the big ones too. And I felt that same deceit. There's this, you embody the energy of the people who have created these institutions to keep you misinformed, misguided, not in your own paradigm, not in your own way. So I think that there's something that's telling for CLR James, that he recognized that. I think recognition, just like going back to Malcolm X, recognizing that where you are isn't where you should be, or that you've learned and grown in the place where you are, and you're going to transform into something else. So like you said, to his credit, he recognized that, all of that had an influence on him.
He thought the major contradiction that African people faced was capitalism. He didn't think that racism was fundamental to the organizing structure of what oppresses African people. He thought race was additive. He thought race and racism were a result of capitalism.
So let me ask you this: so how did he mitigate the transatlantic slave trade, which buttressed racism, which still supports racism and white supremacy? How did he incorporate that?
Well, and this is why I said it's couched in the ideology. So because socialism is a Eurocentric ideology, their primary concern is with the material motivations that shape quote unquote human behavior. So when they say human, they try to say everybody is motivated by materialism, but not everybody's culture is motivated. Not everybody is motivated by the excesses of material wealth.
Right.
So I mean, for Europeans, they reduce everything to objects. So that's why they can stack it up and they'll never stop, because they're desacralized. They don't have any relationship to the environment or the other people they're taking from. So they create imbalance without recognizing, or they don't care. They continue. So for CLR James, and many other Marxists and whoever, you know, the motivation of greed to get rich is motivation enough to explain why there's corruption and immorality amongst the people who control European empires. The problem that this creates, though, is that all imperialism is bad. So, I mean, let's look at Haiti. After they defeated their enslavers, then they became a colony. After they defeated, you know, their colonial mother country, you know, then they became a nation. Then, you know, then they became an empire. So are we going to say that the Haitian Empire is black supremacy because it looks like white supremacy? I mean, tell me who that sounds like. You know, that sounds like these alt-right white Republicans are saying you black people just want the power for yourselves. You know, it's like, yeah, we want power over ourselves for ourselves.
Right.
That's not, I mean, is that black supremacy that the French needed to get expelled from that island for the Africans to be sovereign?
Get out of here. Beat it. Yeah.
I mean, come on. Like, but see, when we take their perspective, then we start talking about you know, things being spooky and things being the devil and things being unnecessary. And we undervalue the achievements of our own ancestors because we've subconsciously put ourselves within a European worldview by looking at things within a European ideology. So these kinds of contradictions are things that ultimately we have to work to resolve. And for me, the angle I took at resolving them is taking a straight shot approach at theories. See, some people, they say you shouldn't get into what people think or what people's ideologies are, or what people's religions are. They say you should. But to me, how else are you going to get into someone's mind?
Period.
Or how else are you going to get into the ideas that shape people's behaviors if you're not dealing with systems of ideas? You know,
right. Exactly.
That's what religions and philosophies and ideologies are. So if you know that these certain European ideologies have a final destination, then you understand where people are headed, you know, based on where people have gone based on these ideologies in the past.
Right. That's right.
You know?
Right. You're right. Okay. Thank you for that one. Thank you. So the book is The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James.
Yeah.
So can you give us something on sexuality or sexual behavior? I don't know if you, I'm putting him on the spot, you guys. I don't know if you know enough about that to have a.
I know a couple books.
You got some on that? Let's hear about that.
So, well, I mean, so are you asking about how as it related to the last conversation about what were we talking about, twerking?
When we were on Omawali's show, on Omawali's podcast, we were talking about is twerking an African cultural what was it? An African cultural
practice.
Movement. Practice. Thank you. For that word. So one of the things that you said in it, and I'm not going to say it because you said it so much better, reference the sexual behaviors of the European, which is different than the sexual behaviors of the African. And so we in this country do a lot of things on a day-by-day basis that are rooted in a Eurocentric view, whether we realize it or not. And so I'm just wondering if you have a greater, a little bit more well-rounded knowledge base on the sexual behaviors of the European that are really truly European based, that's different from African. Have you gotten to that, or do you guys have that in your study in your Africology courses?
Well, I wouldn't say it's an explicit topic of focus, but it naturally comes up. You know, right. it comes up, so it gets addressed, of course, at Temple, and people have varying viewpoints based on, I guess, where they're coming from, right? That's what we're talking about. Where are you coming from? What perspective do you have?
Right, right,
So,
right.
what's the foundation for where you're coming from? So for me, from what I understand of European sexuality, I understand most clearly as expressed by Frances Cress Welsing. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, I think, does a phenomenal job of explaining the insecurity of Europeans that produces racism and causes them to pattern their own behaviors in such ways and attempt to control the behaviors of African people in given ways as it relates to sex. So um basically, long story, Francis Welsing, the ISIS papers, I of course, Dr. Marimba Ani, uh, Yurugu. I know it gets addressed numerous times throughout that text. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ayo Kamathi, Straight Black Pride, and also Baba Malamo Barudi, and his works. He has his text, The Effeminization, Homosexuality and the Effeminization of African Males. And he has other. I have my book here, Yurugu's Eunuchs, and so together, I think when you understand, I think for me, because I was studying in a history department before I was in Africology, you study a lot about Europeans and at different points in history, and you begin to see patterns in their history and culture, just like you
Uh-huh.
see patterns in our history and culture in different places and times. And I began to realize that they're sexually exploitative. That the way European men treat European women is the way Europeans as a people treat other people,
Right.
right? So the thing is, that informs or instructs how they relate to people that they don't see as people. So if they don't see
True.
you as a person and they're still willing to have sex with you, then that makes you a sexual object or a fetish. So that makes you something that can satisfy the need of pleasure, but you can't satisfy the the social or the cultural or
Spiritual.
the spiritual needs
Hmm.
that maybe a partner would fulfill for you. So for Europeans, they're, to me, from my understanding, most of, if we're speaking from a deep cultural, from the deep structure of European culture, their assumptions about sex are all based on pleasure only, or pleasure primarily, right? So basically, if it can satisfy, or if it gives them a tingling, they like it. So whether it's a person, whether it's an animal, whether it's an object, or whether it's themselves, right? If they can reduce it to an object, they will have sex with it. So that means there's no contradiction in logic from the perspective of their worldview between having sex with a black person that they clearly are racializing. They're not recognizing you for who you identify yourself. If you don't, if they don't see you as a person, then they clearly see you as a fetish. So to me, in order for a black person to be in that kind of relationship, they have to accept their position as the subordinate in that relationship. So to me, that's how racism and sex work from their perspective. From the perspective of African people, I think sex is primarily about opening the doorway to creation. So procreation. The unification of male and female principles is what will give you or yield in a child, which will give you precedent for your ancestors to return. So again, this deals with the religious component of it. Like if you're
Yep. The
dealing with
spiritual component.
the spiritual component of sex, if you understand that this is the doorway through which your ancestors return, then
Hmm.
there wouldn't be much value in deviating from that. I mean, some people may deviate from that, but it wouldn't be a societal value. It wouldn't be a social value of the culture. It would be the prerogative of that individual. So for me, I'm not so. The way I see it is, if people decide to get into, let's say, alternative sex styles, then you know what, go do your thing, mind your business. But when you step into the political arena as it relates to sexuality, now you're dealing with what Europeans do when they're talking about sexual identities, and they're talking about um, basically creating an environment for themselves to be reckless and to rape and to exploit sexually with impunity. So they wanted to give you a rationale that would make them a pimp and you not call them a pimp, right? They want to give you a rationale that would make them your lover instead of your rapist, right?
Mm.
They want to give you the rationale that would make you submit to them than than to deny them access, right? So to me, the way I see it is, Europeans, they like to do whatever they want to African people, and I think African people many times are disarmed because we don't see them as racist. If we saw them as racist, I don't think we would actively enter relationships with them unless there's some kind of disconnect in our survival instincts, you know. And normally what happens is you have a disconnect from your survival instincts when you've been disconnected from your own culture,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So that's why normally people who assimilate and want to integrate and have that kind of orientation, they're concerned about being able to have sex with white people and letting white people have sex with them. And that's what integration is all about, right? And that's also what Frances Welsing says. She says that's why they killed Martin Luther King, because he was talking about love. Because, they ultimately understand that if they have enough sex with people of color, then they will cease to be a white people. They won't be white anymore.
They won't be
So
white anymore.
so they're not interested in having children with you and building families with you. They're interested in having sexual relationships with you strategically for whatever their purposes are. So they'll have sex with you maybe for pleasure, maybe because it's fun, maybe it's a good time, maybe you got a lot of money, maybe you got some resources, maybe you got a pension, right? Maybe you
Not a
you know
pension.
maybe you got something. Maybe they have low self-esteem, and other white people don't look at them in a good light. So they come around you, and in your inferiority complex, you put them up on this pedestal, and you love them, and get into this relationship with them, and they're back to where they need to be in terms of their personal esteem. So to me, I feel like we don't understand how racism works in our interpersonal relationships, and I think it translates to how we disconnect our interpersonal to larger collective or systemic issues, or
You
how
know,
sex deal with how sex relates to the larger political issues and how it relates to our interpersonal interactions with races.
you know, I want to touch on two things. What is racist and what is a racist? And when you were saying with having sex and making babies with non-white people, and then not those children are no longer white after that. So in Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's book, I read that book so long ago, I probably
Mm,
should read it again. Like, every chapter was eye-opening. So in case anybody has not read Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's book, it's like she was a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and her clients were young Black children. And in the book, it breaks it, like, so those are a collection of papers or like reports or essays that she did on, like, her findings from some of her patients. It's not like a case study where she talks about the patient directly. These are her extractions and her understanding and interpretation of kind of like blending what she understood from having all of these patients and what she had seen, and also just being a brilliant woman and realizing what's going on. So it tells you what undergirds white fragility masquerading as white supremacy, which is what I say. Why all of the genocide? Why the brainwashing, why the disconnect to, and this is me throwing in my part as well, why the disconnect to our ancestry, why the disconnect from our language, why were all of these African people who were kidnapped mixed up from different countries and tribes, etc., from the continent, so we couldn't speak to each other? Why did all of those things happen? And it's about really our reproduction and trying to prevent that from continuing, so that there's this maintenance of what is considered white. This is touched on in the film Happy. The woman who speaks, I forget her name. I don't want to just say the white woman in the movie, uh, but she was the white woman in the movie. So I apologize for saying that quite like that in this case. But she talked about that in the film Happy. If you read the ISIS papers, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing breaks that down. And there's this fear of annihilation that clearly is embedded, because if genocide was something that, or the act of it was something that is in the past and doesn't happen anymore, then why is it still happening? You can call it by a different name, police brutality, killing unarmed Black men. That's a phrase people like to use, like you're ordering some nuggets at a fast food restaurant. If you look at the weight of what that is, it's killing people. And if you're killing people in mass, that's genocide. If you're incarcerating people in mass, that is a form of genocide, because you see all those bloodlines that don't get to continue, or don't get to continue in mass, because they are incarcerated. So you have these systems in place to keep our reproduction down, to stop our reproduction, ours in particular as African people. Why is that? Okay, so and in that regard, sex and sexuality is used as a weapon, if you will, if we are unable to reproduce with each other. That result is from something that has been violent towards us, including incarceration, because when you've got these Black men who are incarcerated in mass, they're going into these violent environments, correct? So as far as that concerned, I also wanted to mention this one other thing. I was substitute teaching at this school, and I shared an office with two men. One guy was like Portuguese, Latino mix, something like that. And then the other guy was a white guy. And we were all in there talking one day. And he said, when he walks into a room, and this is an unassuming guy, he's not like a big guy with like a thick neck, muscly dude. He's in shape. He was a fit dude, but he isn't anything that would make you look and be like, oh my God, Hulk Hogan just walked in here. And so he says, when he walks into a room, he scans the room to see who's weak, to make sure that he can have dominance in that space. And he just said it so cavalierly and so nonchalant, like he was ordering some nuggets at a fast food restaurant, just telling on himself like a kid. And when I went to prep school, I saw that happen. Long story short, this Jewish kid called me a nigger. The art teacher didn't do anything about it. The middle school headmaster didn't do anything about it. I asked my mom what was the equivalent for nigger for Jew, and she told me. I told her why I needed it too. And the next day he called me a nigger, and I called him a kike. And I said it loud enough for all the white kids in the class to hear, to let them know I got something for you too, if you coming at me. And it was first semester, 6th grade. It was early on into the school year. And so I guess he thought that I was going to be the one that he was going to pick on. He going to dominate. You ain't dominating me. We're going to be here for 7 years. Every time you call me a nigga, I'm going to call you a kike. Trust and believe I'm not the one. Now, I did not know that name because my parents don't walk around calling people by derogatory terms. If there's anybody that has the right to do that, it's Black Americans, okay? But they never did. I never heard that. That's why I had to ask her that. But you know what? My first semester at prep school, I learned derogatory term for Chinese, for Mexican, for Japanese, for Jewish American princess, for Italian. Italian has 3. For Asians who first come here, uh, fresh off the boat, they got a whole name for how long you've been here. For Polish, what else? Like, I was like, Mom, did you know these things existed? Why do those names exist? Those names exist for dominance. So someone can come in here, call you this name, and try to dominate you. That's what that's about. So if I said all that to say this, if your primary concern is dominance, and the first thing you do is to see who you think you can dominate when you walk into a space, just like that dude said out his mouth, sex will not be anything different, because it is primary, it is primal to being a human being, right? We have to procreate, or ain't nobody gonna be here. It's sex is a part of sex, eating, fighting, procreation. We keep those things in order. We keep those things in right balance, and those things are good and useful and needed when we have to do those things. But if it's all under the umbrella of dominance, okay, then it coincides with what he's saying in terms of you become this object. And I'm adding the dominant spin on it, maybe because as a woman, and then also being in environments that are predominantly white, and I got to check these people whenever they need it, and I check them hard. I make sure I leave a scar, because it's not in me to just start something, but I will finish it and not think twice about it. I don't want to do that, but I've experienced me minding my own business and having some white guy try to say something, and so it doesn't stop there if that is a part of the undergirded culture. If you read, if you haven't read the ISIS papers, you got to read the ISIS papers. The ISIS papers is like a battery that jumpstarts the car. All right. Because it answers so many questions of why. What is the purpose of this? Why do we see this repeatedly for centuries? She breaks it down. If you haven't read the book, go get it and read that book.
I think, and I think because I have like a paragraph of it like in my head where she was talking about how she interprets symbols. See, because she was saying, and one of the things she was saying is how she was a child psychiatrist. So because she was a child psychiatrist, Frances Welsing, Dr. Welsing, she was saying because she's a child psychiatrist, she needed to become adept at interpreting the dreams of children in order to infer, what kind of value or significance things may have had in that child's life in order to give them some kind of solution or corrective. So she says, in the same way you interpret the symbols within dreams, she related it directly to the Medu Neter, the language of the Africans in the Nile Valley. So in ancient Kemet, or not ancient, just Kemet, but she yeah. So I mean, I just think Dr. Welsing, she's I think the things that sound far out to people are things that people normally don't engage with directly, and I think because she kind of confronts it head on, relentlessly. I don't think people are always willing to directly confront white racism in such a clear, logical, method, like
and uncoded.
Like, and her words are not like I normally what you find is people, they use big words and jargon when they're being a bit apologetic. She's not apologetic. She's not apologetic. She's not inflammatory either. She's not bombastic. Like I feel like just listening to her, it just made too much sense. Like just listening to her, and after a while, it sat in on me. Honestly, I kind of underestimated, the how on the money she was with certain things. I mean, some things it took me a while to get back to. I didn't agree with everything I read in the book, but then I come back read a couple years later, and I'm like, wow, like that's not how I remembered that.
Right,
So
right.
it's like sometimes you gotta read things more than once in order to kind of like appreciate what you read. Sometimes people read just to read. They read to get through. They don't read to understand. You know.
Right. Yeah, right. We're at a point where we must read to understand, with the goal of shifting our brains back to where they would be but for Ma'afa, but for the transatlantic slave trade. Where would you be? When I was, oh my goodness, I don't know if this was high school or early college, I wanted to find Black God. And I had the conversation with myself, and I'm using the terms that I used then. When it was just Black people, when it was just, Africans and God, how did we relate to God? How did we connect to God? Whatever that is, that's what I want to do. From that, what frame of mind exists in that space where there is no invader to brainwash you? There is no, things you have to overcome, you know, um, uh, horrible traditions to learn about and to dismiss. You know, uh, how would we be thinking if we had all these thousands and hundreds of thousands of years without any kind of invaders, and we continued along with our African minds intact? That's what I was searching for.
Yeah.
The ISIS papers helps you, like I said, it's a jump start on a dead battery on a car, because it, like, just like what he was saying, just like what Imo was saying, it tells you, it gives you information that is so straightforward. And it, like, for me, it kind of decoded why people do what they do, not just why Europeans do what they do, but why do some Black people do what they do. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Professor Small said to me last year when he was on Tuesday Talk. In brief, I gave an example of how there were three men that I worked with, and two of them I felt had neutered themselves because there was no sexual energy that they emitted. And one is a devout Christian, and the other one loves him some white girls and white everything. And the other one, the other women, when we worked at a place, we thought he was sexy. When he walked by, we'd be like, hello. And then we'd be like, girl, he's so fine, girl, whatever. The stuff that we do when a good looking man walks by and he can't hear us. Professor Small said to me, they did not neuter themselves. They are sick, and you, priestess, have to heal them. And you wouldn't get mad at the blind for not being able to see, and the deaf who can't hear, and the dumb who can't speak. Okay. Sidebar, as a priestess, that was a whole lot of pressure that I felt. But basically what he's saying is, there, the, like, brainwashing or the over encompassing infection, if you will, renders some people in this way. And these are the people who we love. These are our family members. These are our siblings. These are our parents. These are our children. These are our neighbors. Good people who have the best of intentions and do not know kind of where they are in this whole fight to regain our African minds back. The ISIS papers helps you understand what you're looking at. It's
Yeah. It
direct.
tells you what you're up against.
It tells you what you're up against. It sure does. It's like the playbook for what's going on. That's a book you guys have to get, because it just decodes stuff. And then you can also look for my Tuesday Talk with Professor Smalls last year, and you read the book, The ISIS Papers. It'll lightweight change your life if you're still trying to figure out what in the world is going on and why. Talawa Adodo said, "Love some white girls." Beckification. You can use that in your dissertation. Talawa, can he use that in his dissertation as long as he quotes you? You're gonna put that in
Tyler, I'm
there?
taking it.
Oh, you take it? Backification.
That's my man. He always has the apt terms. What's the other one? He calls the Kardashians they're a team of Mandingo huntresses, right? And I'm not gonna share all your I'm gonna let you, Tyler. I'm gonna let you come out with your grammar, your
With your grammar
definition,
book for us, we need
your
it.
your
With the thesaurus,
your
thesaurus.
Afrocentric dating strategy book.
What'd you say? Afrocentric what?
Afrocentric dating strategy book.
Well, the Afrocentric dating strategy book for your girl Boots Ashad is you got to have an Afrocentric mind. You got to be able to spit some facts and some knowledge. If you don't, then you lost me. That's what I know for sure. And like 90s hip hop was so dope with that. The Brand Nubians, I love them. Rakim, Chuck D, KRS-One, all of that, BDP, that was dope because you got a message with what they were saying. But anyway, I digress. So, in winding some of this down, can you give us one final last fact that with a book that we can go out and get, and this will jumpstart or strengthen, buttress, continue the work we're doing to shift our minds to an African perspective so that we can obtain Black liberation? What's that last book?
So what was the book? I said CLR James, The Black Jacobins. I think you should read Irritated Genie instead of Black Jacobins, but read them both. Read them both. But if I was gonna give you a third final, I said ISIS Papers.
Let's see.
What's the one book?
Well, why don't you give us that third fact, and then I'm sure the book that goes along with it or information, we can come up with that. I'm going to put in the chat the books that you mentioned, Irritated Genie. I'm trying to Google so I can get the author.
Okay. So you said another history fact about African history?
Yeah, something that people can read and be like, whoa, I needed this.
Go read about.
Is the Irritated Genie Sufisi? No, that's not it.
Irritated Genie is an essay
Jacob
written
Carruthers?
by Jacob Carruthers. That's
Jacob
it.
Carruthers. Okay. So go ahead. You were saying something.
I just think that essay is more constructive for us understanding what happened in Haiti. But oh man. Well, I gave you the Haiti joint. I was prepared. I was prepared. It's not a joint.
We all know what that means, the Haiti joint. We know what that means.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking out loud because I'm trying to think of a text to offer because I don't know the text for that one, so I'm not going to say that one.
Give us the idea. We can Google and find a text, or people can do their own work. You gave us 3 books. Just give us the idea and people can do some work.
I don't know, like right now, because what I wrote down was my like I wrote like 2 or 3 things in African history that I like. So I'm trying to think what else, because I didn't write down the source, so I'm trying to think.
I know the historian wants the source. We gonna find it. Just tell us what you wrote down. We'll be all right.
So basically what I wrote down is of course Jean-Jacques Dessalines. I wrote him down because I want to talk about Haiti. I wrote down Sundiata Keita because Sundiata Keita was the one who formed the Mali Empire. He consolidated the 6 states that ultimately become the Mali Empire. So
what's the name of it? So you have a book for that one?
Yeah, actually, you could read Sundiata, an old epic of Mali.
I'm sorry, I said that. My bad. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Sundiata, go ahead.
Sundiata is the Lion King,
Mhm.
the original Lion King, not the animals, the African man, right? He's the emperor of the Mali Empire, or the first one to consolidate the Mali Empire. His story to me mirrored the story of John Jacques Dessalines in
Mm.
some ways, but not always, because it's different environment, different circumstance. But uh uh
So with
yeah,
Sundiata, what's the book that goes along with it?
the book I have is by D.T. Niane. It's a very short book. It's very thin. It's probably
D
about
DT, and then can you spell the last name?
Niane. He
Ainne. And
he's the
what's the name of the
one,
book?
Sundiata, an epic of old Mali.
And why is this important for us to learn about Mali?
The reason it's important to study that is because a lot of time when people study West African civilization, they get caught up with Mansa Musa, and they get caught up with and there are some prolific African personalities that were Muslims, but I think Sundiata Keita gives you the basis to understand the chronology of West African of history within West Africa. So for me,
Okay.
you have to begin with Wagadu, or what people call ancient Ghana. So when you begin there, then naturally you would have to deal with Sundiata Keita in the development of Mali and later Songhai. But I think he's an important person, that it's easy for people to attach on to Sundiata, because everybody already knows the Lion King story. Everybody knows the Eurocentric, or the white version that Disney has, which is still a good movie. I mean, I'm not gonna knock the Lion King. Like, I don't like the movie. I just know it's a derivative of
Something
of
we had.
of something that has more substance, a history that has more substance, that has been reduced for the convenience of entertainment value and whatever white nationalist propaganda undergirds the movie without us recognizing, right? I mean,
Mm.
I think all movies are going to be like that in some way. But I still like The Lion King. I just think we should actually go back to the history of the actual Lion King and his people, and basically look to see who these people are, rather than just being satisfied with Disney stories, right? And also
Facts.
we shouldn't be satisfied with. I'm not. I personally believe, again, with the ideological religious thing. I think Mansa Musa, his orientation is represented by his Hajj to Mecca. Basically, he
Mm.
went to Arabia, the holy land of Arabs, you know, instead of maybe being oriented towards his own ancestral lands and significant sites within his own region, right? His own country.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Sundiata Keita. So I guess uh but those are, so what I say, I did Haiti, Mali, and the last one, I like the story of Amanarines. I think there needs to be more research done on her. She's a Kandake, she's a Nubian queen. She's the
Mhm.
one who effectively stymied the Romans when they tried to move past Egypt. When they conquered Greek controlled Egypt and kept trying to move into the interior of the African continent, the Nubians put that ass whooping on them. And they were led by a woman named Amanarines. So
How do you
I'd like
spell her
to.
name?
Amanarines is Amanarinas. So I personally am doing more of my research on her. Actually, I've heard the name, I've come across the name in my studies. Home Team History on YouTube. He has a pretty good video. I think he might have 2 or 3 videos on it. It's pretty interesting. So
Team
that's why I
history.
said, for me, I'm all about, you know, I think if we're gonna study African history, then we got to break new ground. We got to have new frontiers, and we got to have new interpretations, so
That's
that
right.
our people are very clear on, how to understand our history and what's important in these narratives, and how these narratives we can draw upon for knowledge and inspiration. And so for me, I'm all about we got to write our own history. That's really what my dissertation is going to be about. That's what I'm trying to help. uh that's ultimately what I'd like to teach, these kinds of methods to really write and read African history on Afrocentric terms, so we can um resolve some of these contradictions and get ourselves out of this predicament that we find ourselves in, that's produced by our colonial enemies, right? I guess that's the best way I could think of that.
And lack of knowledge of self. So I have the books like pinned, if you will. The Irritated Genie by Jacob Carruthers, The Isis Papers by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and Sundiata, An Epic of Old Mali by T.D. Niani. So can y'all write that down? Write that down, y'all. Write it, text it, take a picture, and let's get started, right? So the information, I guess the summary, if you will, with these three books is that these will continue to help orient you to something that's Afrocentric. I'm sorry, to place your mind in an Afrocentric space. That way you're seeing things from our perspective and open to receiving the information that we need for Black liberation, right?
If you want to know Afrocentricity, I think you should get Afrocentric Paradigm, or because that has I like the intro essay there. I think that's a good introduction. I think that gives you what you need to loosely deal with Afrocentricity. But I think going further into Dr. Sante's books, especially Kemet, Afrocentricity, and Knowledge. But I'm not going to sit here and push my curriculum on y'all. But I do think that those Afrocentricity is sometimes it's like, I understand why, like, some people don't deal with things that systematically, and I understand that. But I think the more enhanced your approach is to what you're reading and what you're studying, the more you'll yield from what you're reading.
That's
So
right.
well, I think you should study theory as well if you can. I mean, these books are available to everybody.
So Afrocentric. So the book is the book titled Afrocentric Paradigm or Afrocentricity?
I named two books. The first one was The Afrocentric Paradigm by Ama Mazama. It's an edited volume.
Oh, that please.
And Afrocentric Paradigm, or
Ama Mazada.
Ama Mazama. So AMA and then MAZAMA.
Oh,
And
sorry.
then
Wait, I'm sorry. Say it again. AMA.
that's her first name, and then last name is MAZAMA.
Okay. That was hard for me, y'all. I'm sorry. What's the other book?
Sorry. And the other one I said,
Centricity?
Kemet, Afrocentricity, and Knowledge.
Oh,
I think that Dr. Asante, I think that's probably the best one. I don't know how readily available it is. It's an older book, came out in like the 90s, like 91. So.
It's an older book. It came out in the 90s. So
but
young.
But what I mean is it might not be in print. I hope it is.
Hold on. Afrocentricity and knowledge.
And Knowledge.
And can you spell the author's name, please? Please.
Molefi Asante.
Can you spell it?
MOLEFI, and then Asante is ASANTE.
All right, knowledge. All right, Afrocentric Paradigm by Ama Mazama. Kemet, Afrocentricity, and Knowledge by Molefi Asante. I think I got that from one of my dad's books. My dad is an ancestor. But that sounds, I think I have this book from my dad. I don't know. We'll see. So I'm putting this in the chat and I'm about to pin this. Oops, let me pin it. Okay, so there you guys go. Afrocentric Paradigm by Amma Mazama. Kemet, Afrocentricity and Knowledge by Malefi Asante. Is that the right one? I feel like it is too. Yeah, that's correct. Yes, there you go. So, guys, there are 5 books with names and titles and authors. And if you miss this, or you need the titles, you can DM me on Facebook through the Shrine of Ma'at. I'm also Yoga Girl Sai on Facebook as well. I can give you the information there as well. I'm Yoga Girl Sai on Instagram too, so you can do that as well. So thank you so much for coming on to Tuesday Talk and imparting all of this wisdom on us. This is definitely something that we need. Some foundational books, and just like the autobiography of Malcolm X was a life changer for him at when he read the book. How old were you when you read that book?
I was 19.
Okay. How old are you
No,
now?
I'm 29. So
Okay.
so I read that book when I was like a sophomore in college. No, I was probably 18 when I read the book. I was 18 when I read the book. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That was the first book I read cover to cover. I've never read any other book. Well, not never. What I'm saying is, at that point,
Right.
I was kind of skating through school, and then I read that book and it kind of turned me around. It gave me the motivation to really dive in, start actually reading and exploring and researching.
That was the ISIS papers for me. I was like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, you're like, to me, because like we said before, like she breaks it down. So Rob Albank said, damn, I learned something tonight. I'm glad you did, and I hope a lot of us did. I did. And I'm glad that you were able to come on and give us this information. So, we had some of the facts that he gave us. So he's in the Africology program at Temple. There's a method that we need to learn so that this can become a tool to use to regain our African minds and for Black liberation. Okay, so this broadcast will be rebroadcast again. It's live now, but it pops up on the other 3 channels: the Shrine of Ma'at YouTube, the Shrine of Ma'at public Facebook page, and also Comedic Legacy Today. So thank you guys for see, Menzi Maseko said the ISIS papers also blew his mind in a positive way. So I just want to say thank you guys for coming to Tuesday Talk and supporting what we do here, as well as supporting the Shrine of Ma'at. And we have to also continue to support brothers like Ìmò Òdó and continuing with what it is that we do as Pan-African people. So thank you. Very African broadcast. Hey, that's the point. So until next time, Shema Matep, and have a good evening. Mwah.